I've been measuring and looking at Mesquite water use for quite a long time, and that started really in the riparian areas along the San Pedro. With brush management, you often get these ideas of, sometimes I hear these ideas about, well, we'll save water, the range end will retain more water if we do brush management, or we'll change, somehow affect the evapotranspiration with say mesquite, or how grasslands have changed to mesquite savannas, and how the evapotranspiration has changed in those. And so I think that's why Phil invited me here, is to talk about this general issue. So this is a picture of the Santa Rita experimental range. In the center there, you can see what we call a flux tower, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's measuring these vertical exchanges of water vapor and returning back to the atmosphere. So this is a little outline of my hour-long talk. And being the first speaker, you can kind of hit all the time flexibility.
Over here with the watch out.
So a little introduction. Let's see here. I'll talk about some different approaches to quantifying ET, or evapotranspiration, rangeland water balance in ET, grassland, shrubland, savanna ecosystem water use, that's typo, and then mesquite management assessment that we'll be hoping to conduct in the future. So this is a picture from the outlet at Walnut Gulch experimental range, experimental watershed down by Tombstone, which our unit has operated for the last 60 years or so. So this is a big flow. As you can see, a lot of water coming out of the landscape, but this is a very, very small percent of that. 1% of the precipitation that falls on Walnut Gulch comes out the outlet here. So my thought question to you is, can you visualize what that other 99% might look like? Well, the answer is you can't visualize that, right? Because it's water vapor. So water vapor returns to the atmosphere. You can't see it. So there's kind of this atmospheric, this invisible atmospheric exchange. And so what is evapotranspiration, in case anybody's had to try to explain what this word means, and it's very complicated. We often call it ET just because we don't want to say evapotranspiration a lot of times. And really, ET is, really connects a lot of different exchanges between the land and atmosphere. So we can talk about the water balance of an ecosystem. We can talk about how precipitation is turned into runoff, either surface runoff or groundwater recharge. And then the remainder of that water goes back to the atmosphere either through soil evaporation or transpiration from the plants. So it's just that combined word of evaporation, which typically means bare soil evaporation, and transpiration is called evapotranspiration. Well, at the same time that transpiration is returned to the atmosphere, that's very well coupled with what they call latent heat flux, which is just evaporation in energy terms. And that's connected to the energy balance of the system. So you have a certain amount of radiation coming to the system. That radiation is either partitioned into heat going into or out of the soil, or the remainder needs to be returned to the atmosphere either by sensible heat flux, which is the heat that you kind of feel emanating off of water. You need to convert liquid water into water vapor. That consumes a certain amount of energy to spread those molecules apart. So energy is consumed in that process. And then that's also linked to the carbon dioxide cycle, which I'm not going to be talking about today. But basically, as plants take in CO2, they have to open up their leaf stomata, the little pores on their leaves. And at the time they do that, they lose water. And that's what's driving this transpiration here. And as well as the soil and the understory has to do a similar type of thing. I should say that the exchange, the release of carbon back to the atmosphere is also fueled by soil microbes that break down the carbon. So again, our group has been operating Walnut Gulch experimental watershed. Is everybody pretty familiar with Walnut Gulch? Hopefully you came to the 60th anniversary that we had a few months ago. So Walnut Gulch is located down in the San Pedro Valley around Tombstone. It's an ephemeral channel watershed. The the main stem only flows during the rainstorms. And on this on Walnut Gulch, we have a whole bunch of these black dots on here. That's all precipitation gauges. And then a lot of these red dots, which are measurements of runoff and oftentimes sediment. The reason why we have to have all those rain gauges out there is, as we know, our summer thunderstorms are very localized. We know that our neighbor gets a lot more rain than we do, and we're only a quarter mile away from them. So we have to have a lot of rain gauges to really know what the input of water is into this system. And then we measure from very small watersheds all the way out to the outlet. We use rain gauges, meteorological towers to measure the atmosphere. And we use flumes, again, to measure runoff and sediment, either on these small watersheds or these big parts of the watershed. And after you do these measurements over a lot of years, so then you can start to come up with a water balance for Walnut Gulch. And that water balance tells us some really interesting things about what evapotranspiration might be. So on general, about 350 millimeters of rainfall falls onto the watershed. And then out of that 350, we have in our upland watersheds maybe about 23 millimeters of runoff on average. Less than 1% of the run on average comes out of those hill slopes. Most of it goes down into the soil and then is quickly returned back to the atmosphere by evapotranspiration. There's very little upland groundwater recharge, and I'll show some evidence for that in the next slide. Some of that runoff goes down these channels, these dry channels, and as that water goes down those dry channels, it just keeps infiltrating as it goes. And so by the time you get to the watershed outlet, only 2 millimeters is made it from that 23. Most of it's gone into what we call channel losses. Some is recharge. We have evidence now that groundwater recharge does occur along these ephemeral channels. The water goes down. It's enough of it at one big pulse time that it gets beyond the root zone of plant and then it travels down to the groundwater table. And some feeds the trees and the grasses that live along the channel. This is some from a paper by Alyssa Coase and Don Poole at the USGS here in Tucson. And they went out and made estimates of recharge all throughout the San Pedro Valley in different locations. So they looked at ephemeral channels, and they looked up in upland areas like in oak savannas, and also in like the grassland and shrubland areas of Walnut Gulch. And what they do is they go out and they have a drilling rig, and they go out and measure. They just keep taking cores that they're drilling down into the ground. So here's distance below the surface. And then they're measuring something called tritium, which is an isotope of hydrogen that was produced during the bomb testing, atmospheric nuclear bomb testing back in the 50s, but mainly 50s. And that released a lot of tritium in the atmosphere, and the precipitation carried a signature of that tritium because of that. So that tritium went down in the soil, and then what they can do is, with that tritium profile, they can measure how far the long-term infiltration is in these soils. So if there was a good vertical flux downward in these soils, if water was moving down quickly, you wouldn't see this what they call this bomb pulse here. It'd be washed out. It'd just be carried with the water, flushed out. But it all gets deposited here about, say, about 1 or 2 meters deep. That's because the depth of infiltration gets to about that depth, and by that time, all the plants and the evaporation from the bare soil has pulled that water back up to the atmosphere. And the same thing can be done with so this is the tritium in the red here, and then this is the chloride. So there's also a certain amount of salts in the precipitation. You can see that chloride pulse as well. If it was well flushed, that chloride would be washed through the beta zone. And you can see that these pulses, these bulges line up very well. And then you can get an estimate of the infiltration flux. So by the time you get to about 1 meter deep, or so, the estimates of long-term recharge are less than 0.5 centimeters per year. Very, very negligible amount of runoff. And they did this both at our grassland sites, at our shrubland sites in Walnut Gulch. So I hope I've convinced you, at least some of the studies, that pretty much the evapotranspiration in our rangelands comes down to a simple equation. It's really evapotranspiration equal to the precip minus just your local surface runoff that we see as, you know, ephemeral channel runoff or flash floods. Now we can do direct measures of evapotranspiration as well. Now with modern technology and computers and microchips and so on, we can begin to measure evapotranspiration directly. So this is a really crazy, like, I'm not trying to like peace out or I'm not trying to trip you guys out here this early in the morning. This is not a tie-dye shirt that my daughter made. And, so this is actually just a visualization of what the flow in the atmosphere looks like if you colored it with weird dye. Because these flows are invisible, we don't see these eddies in the atmosphere, but the atmosphere is very turbulent. Just like a river, if you float along the Colorado River, the Grand Canyon, you see big eddies going this way. The atmosphere is turbulent in a vertical way. And so these eddies are really what are responsible for this enhanced diffusion of water vapor away from the surface. The surface is wetter, the atmosphere is drier, so there's going to be a diffusion upwards that's really enhanced by this turbulence process. And so these eddies, this is where this measurement technique that I use is called eddy covariance. It's trying to quantify what these eddies are. It's a direct measurement of this vertical exchange of either energy or water or carbon dioxide. Here's just an example of a flux tower in real life out at our shrubland site in Lucky Hills. And we have these fancy instruments on top that do a lot of work for us to try to quantify evapotranspiration. And if we show, this is an example of the water balance versus the flux tower measurement of evapotranspiration. So this is for a whole complete year. I believe this is at a Kendall grassland site. And so I'm plotting the different components of our water budget. So here's precipitation. So it's cumulative precipitation. So every time it rains, the cumulative precipitation jumps up. And then there's the monsoon season there, you can see, and then into the monsoon. And you can see that evapotranspiration follows that precipitation line very, very closely. There's also some other components of there's some storage in the soil. Sometimes the soil moisture is stored. As we get more precipitation than evapotranspiration, we get some buildup, maybe 50, 100 millimeters of water stored in the soil. But then that also gets used up as the plants are happily taking that up with the roots, transferring it back. And you can also see there's some here runoff. So basically these measurements agree within about 5 or 10%. So we have good confidence in both this direct measurement and this indirect measurement. So now I'm going to give you some examples of grassland, shrubland, savanna ecosystem water use. This is a plot. This is a picture from the Santa Rita Experimental Range, 1903, from their photo archive. You guys have all probably seen this picture. I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure. But anyway, so they're actually raking grass here for cattle in this picture. And this is 1951, same picture. Just different time, 50 years later, a lot of the mesquite had expanded beyond the ephemeral channels and out into the rangeland. A lot of succulents as well. And by 1975, we get this really encroached savanna grassland, or what I call a savanna grass system with trees and grass. So I've been making measurements in these upland areas for the past 10 years or so. Some sites maybe the past 6 years. So this is, I have 4 sites in the upland areas. This is in a, let's see here, let me get oriented. This is Walnut Gulch, grasslands, upper parts of Walnut Gulch. Kendall grassland is precipitation, 340 millimeters. Here's the Lucky Hill shrubland. It's a kind of Chihuahuan desert scrub type vegetation. This is in the Santa Rita experimental range. That's at Mesquite, Savannah. And this is a grassland in the upper end of the Santa Rita experimental range. So what did the eddy covariance measurements from these different sites tell us? Here's a plot of precipitation and evapotranspiration on an annual scale at those 4 different sites. Probably in the back it's a little bit hard to see the different colors, but you can see that the blue is the Santa Rita Savannah site, the green is the Santa Rita grassland site. Again, I told you that these had a little bit more precipitation than most sites on average. And then our shrubland in red and our Walnut Gulch grassland here. So you can see here's our 1-to-1 line. So you can see that not all the water that falls in precipitation is returned by evapotranspiration, but it's pretty close. And so I put those ratios, those average ratios, by those diamonds there. And you can see that actually at the wetter end of things here, there's a little bit more. The ET goes to precipitation. Serious.
5 minutes.
Okay. She's waving bad signs at me. Like, get the heck out of here. I'm too long. I thought I had 20 minutes then.
For.
Okay, so I got to wrap it up already.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to answer any questions.
Well, there you go.
So you can see that
In that case.
the long-term ratios are pretty close, a little bit higher to evapotranspiration. And then here a little bit less of the total precipitation goes to ET. So, but what we don't see is any kind of relationship between ecosystem type, like the grassland with Savannah. Here's a grassland with 0.94. Here's another grassland with 0.85. You don't see any relationship there with some kind of evaporation efficiency of that precipitation. And just really the differences in these patterns are really have to do with the site's topography. So at these sites, there's going to be a little more runoff than there are at these sites, which are deeper, well-drained, sandy soils, and less inside. There's no real channel networks. So more of the water that falls stays in the ground there, and then is used as evapotranspiration. Here, there's a little bit more of a channel network. And here's just an example of that. I wish I had a better picture of the shrubland site, but it has these kind of a well-defined channel network that does lead to more overland flow and more runoff. Here's the average runoff ratio at that site, about 8%. So there's a more efficient network of channels there that take that overland flow and then deliver it to the channels. And once it's in the channels, then it really can get away from the site. Whereas at the grassland site, we have a little less runoff, or a ratio of about 5%. We have this big swale at our grassland where we have upland erosion, probably similar to the shrubland, but as that water gets down into this area, it has a chance to infiltrate where it doesn't have this nice clear channel to run out of. So hopefully I've convinced you that really there's not a lot to do with brush management or mesquite versus grass in the upland areas. That the evapotranspiration is really just what the precipitation is. You don't actually have that many fancy of measurements. If you had a precipitation gauge out there, you did a really good estimate of what your evapotranspiration is. So we are looking to do a little brush management experiment. That's been done a lot in the past in southern Arizona and throughout the West. But we hope to do it a little bit better this time. We have some long-term watersheds, small watersheds at the Santa Rita experimental range, where we also have a flux tower nearby, operated by Arizona State University, by Santa Rita Mesquite flux towers right here. We hope we have about 40 years of watershed data from these sites. So we have a really good idea of what the rainfall, runoff, and sediment production is on these watersheds. We also have a good idea of what the evapotranspiration and carbon exchange is from these sites. And now if we do some mesquite treatment on this area, we hope to follow how that changes not only just in terms of rangeland productivity, which has really been the focus of most brush management treatments, was looking at forage production. Well, we know there's a lot of other ecosystem services that are affected by brush management. And that could be runoff sediment, it could be plant diversity, or some metric of biodiversity, evapotranspiration, carbon fluxes and stores, and also trying to improve our models to better get an assessment of what brush management might be doing for more than just productivity, but also on these other suite of ecosystem services. Just a little advertisement there for something that we're hoping to gear up for within the next 5 years. And so in conclusion, ET is a dominant surface flux. The direct measurements are providing new comparisons and insights. There's little evidence that ecosystem type changes soil water balance. What is available is used. Watershed condition is an important determinant of what is available, and new studies are needed to evaluate the impact of brush management across a broader range of